Welcome class back to chapter 4, working with lists. This is the third video and the final video for chapter 4 where we'll cover the objectives working with part of a list, tuples, and then lastly we'll look at styling your code. So looking at working with part of a list, we look at slices. So to make a slice, you specify the index of the first and last elements. Python stops one item before the second index, just like it did with the range method as well. So in this example, we're slicing starting at index 0, okay, and we're going to index 2. Okay, so the first 3. So let's go ahead and look at that example here. Okay, we've got 0 through 3. And we run it and we get Charles, Martina, and Michael. So the next example is starting at index of 1, okay, which would be our Martina, okay, and going, okay, to index 3, so 0, 1, 2, and 3. We run our output, okay, and we got Martina, Michael, and Florence. Okay, the next one, we don't specify a starting, so that means we start at the beginning of the list. Okay, so we get our first 4. Okay, so 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then if we specify a starting index, but not an ending index, it'll go to the end of the list. So in this case, we start at Michael, which is index 2, and we go to the end of the list. Okay, and then one more, we can start at the back of the list, just like we did in chapter 3. So -3 means we'll start at Michael, and since we don't have a second index, we're going to go to the end of the list. So next we can go ahead and combine this with looping. So looping through a slice. So we just add it on to after our list name. So in this case, we're going to go to 0, and we're going to stop one position before 3. So 0, 1, and 2. So let's go ahead and add this to our example. Okay, so print here are the first 3 players on my team, 4 player in players. Again, 0, 1, and 2. Okay, we're going to print out the player in title case. Okay, so we've got our output of Charles, Martina, and Michael. Copying a list. So if we want to copy an entire list, we have to use the slice notation of square brackets, colon, and then square brackets. So starting at the beginning of the list, going all the way to the end of the list. And we'll talk about this and why this type of syntax or coding does not work. So let's go ahead and look at foods. And we'll go ahead and clear this terminal out here. Okay, so my foods, 3 list items. Okay, creates a copy of the list using the slice notation, and we'll go ahead and run the output. Okay, so my favorite foods are, okay, and my friend's favorite foods are the exact same thing because all we did was create a copy, okay, and printed out each one of these lists. So let's see if we can add to it, play around with it a little bit. So in your book, under the section Copying a List, we're going to go ahead and add this in, where we're going to add something to the My Foods list. And we're going to add in this value. Then Friend Foods, we are going to add in this value. So now the first one should say these 3 values, okay, plus this value, okay, and then Friends Foods should have those 3 values without this value, and then ice cream. So let's go ahead and run, and we see we got these 3, okay, and then the first one's got cannoli, and then the second one has got ice cream added to it. Now let's see what happens when we forget to do this notation of creating a copy. Okay, notice that both of the lists has the same values. Okay, so what this does is it's actually without that slice notation, that copy notation, It's creating another variable. So friends foods is just actually referencing my foods. Okay, and that's all it's doing. So make sure that you include the correct slice notation to make sure that you have individual lists. Next, we'll look at tuples. So tuples are noted with a set of parentheses. So far we've used square brackets to create our list, so now we're adding another syntax, and that is of parentheses. Tuples are considered immutable and that they do not change values. So in this case, we've got dimensions, and dimensions assign two values, 200 as well as 50. Okay, and then we are going to print each one of those out. So let's go ahead and look at this. Okay, so if we run this, okay, we get 200 printed out and 50 printed out. Okay, so you might think that perhaps you could go ahead and just update a value. Okay, and we can try that. We're going to go ahead and say dimensions. We're going to do index of 0, and we're going to say, well, it's not 200 anymore, it's 250. Okay, and we'll go ahead and run and see what it has to say. Tuple object type error does not support item assignment. So immutable, meaning it's constant, meaning you cannot update, okay, with a statement like this. The only way that you can overwrite a value in a tuple is by reassigning the list. So if I do this, print these out, change this with a brand new tuple statement, and do a print again, I can see now that I don't have an error and I have a new value in the front of my list at index, or in front of my tuple at index of 0. So if your values do need to update, then you're not going to use a tuple. Okay, so then you're going to use a list notation. So let's look at your last lab. Okay, but before we do that, let's end with our last slide of styling your code. Write code that is easy to read. So as I've been going through these examples, I've been showing you good spacing, good indentation, so continue to practice that. Okay, it makes it very easy to debug. Okay, so indentation, 4 spaces per indentation level. Your editor is set up to do that. So again, just a reminder, don't use 4 space bars ever, okay, to indent. Line length, each line should be less than 80 characters, so 1 through 79. And then use blank lines to make your code more readable. Okay, and again, the editor is set up here with those number of characters. So just let your editor do the wrapping, especially as we get into our alien invasion project, which will be beginning shortly. Okay, so let's look at that last lab, and that's 4-13. It's called buffet. So a buffet style restaurant only offers only 5 basic foods. Think of 5 simple foods and store them in a tuple. Use a for loop to print each food the restaurant offers. Okay, and then try to modify one of the items like I did with dimensions. Once you try that and you get that type error, you go ahead and comment out your line, okay, so that I can give you credit for this particular bullet. Okay, and then go ahead and reassign 2 new values into your tuple, okay, and then use a for loop again to print out the revised menu. So that wraps up chapter 4, where in this video we covered working with part of a list, where we worked with slices. We also worked with tuples, and we also looked at how we can style our code effectively. Questions on this section, please let me know. Thank you.